cussing and laughing so long that even my mama thinks that my mind is gone. But I ain't never crossed a man that didn't deserve it. Me be treated like a punk, you know that's unheard of. You better watch how you're talking and where you're walking, or you and your homies might be lying and chalk. I really hate the trip, but I gotta low. As they croak, I see myself in the pistol smoke. Fool, I'm the kind of G the little homies wanna be like, on my knees in the night, saying prayers in the street light. Been spending most of their lives living in the gangster's paradise. We've been spending most of their lives living in the gangster's paradise. We keep spending most of our lives living in the gangster's paradise. We keep spending most of our lives living in the gangster's paradise. Look at the situation they got me facing. I can't live a normal life. I was raised by the state, so I gotta be down with the hood team. Too much television watching got me chasing dreams. I'm an educated fool with money on my mind. Got my 10 in my hand and a gleam in my eye. I'm a loped out gangster, set tripping banker, and my homies is down, so don't arouse my anger. Fool, death ain't nothing but a heartbeat away. I'm living life, do or die.
Hello, everyone. Welcome from New York, Las Vegas, and Spokane. It's the state of Washington, right?
Woke Soviet Republic of Washington, as I prefer to call it. Semantically way more accurate, even though it's not the official name, obviously.
Amazing. Okay, welcome, everyone. I see that people are joining. Started with my favorite clip of judicial corruption in New York. Those who follow my work and the page on Fire Janet McFarland see that actually it seems like she's been fired, or at least transferred to another court. I'll dedicate a separate show to that, but her caseload, after being at the 300, 400 mark about a year ago, was has fallen to 23 cases as of today. And she doesn't have any appearances in the next 2 days, and everything else is scattered. She caused a lot of damage to children and parents in Staten Island, New York. But it seems that the peaceful public, relentless exposure shows that the government belongs to the people, not vice versa. But we'll talk about that later. Glad to have you on the show, Predrag. You have a couple topics, that we didn't finish last time. Thanks everybody for joining. And Matthew had a topic that was burning his bones, so please go.
Well, no, this is the, I was talking to the producers earlier this week about having a rant at the beginning of the show. So we're going to try the rant at the beginning of the show here. Essentially, this came out of a conversation, with clients, and I'm representing more and more people in California. And one thing I'm noticing, the more people I talk to, is how infrequently they let children testify. It seems that the children never go to court. The children never testify. They never set foot in the courtroom. We really don't know their best interest. You hear the judges talk about the best interest. They don't even know the children's names, and they purport to speak for the best interest of the children. But how come the children don't come to court to testify? Now, some people think it's okay to have the children testify remotely or something, or the children will testify through the caseworkers. Some kind of county employee will interview the child and then write down their testimony, but that's at least 2 levels of hearsay right there. These are out-of-court statements offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted in the instant family court setting, whatever that is. And I just think that's really a problem, because we're not hearing from the children. And, when I start talking to clients and they're asking me, how come the children don't testify? How come I can't have my children come in and explain exactly what happened? And I just think, I think this is emblematic of how insincere the family courts really are. Because if they were sincere, they would want to hear from the children. They would want to know what the children have to say. And I think also there's another side of this coin that I think is really important too, is the family courts never tell the children anything. I will often see on minute orders, it'll have who appears. It'll say, so-and-so attorney for the petitioner, so-and-so attorney for respondent, and then it'll say minor child not present. And it's as if what were they expecting the minor child to show up in court that day? But you'll always see that on minute orders. I've seen it in Nevada as well. It'll say, a minute order where the minor child is listed, but they're not present today. Well, were they ordered to court? And I think what's happening, one of the biggest injustices in the family court holocaust, and there are many, but I think one of the saddest things is that the children are really left with no idea of what's going on. The children really have to rely on the custodial parent who's going to be biased and has every motive to falsify. They have to rely on that parent to know what's going on. And I think there should be some mechanism where the courts or the judge actually tells the child, this is what's happening, and this is how long the temporary order is going to last. And, just so they have an idea what's happening. But the children are completely kept out of the loop. They're never given any information about the family court situation that's going on, nor does the court ever inquire of them. I think that's really lousy. But then again, all the family court needs to change. So that's my rant. I hope that wasn't too long, but that's essentially it. So.
Yeah,
And if I may follow up on that particular topic, Matthew, one comment and one question for you, for your opinion. The comment is, I'm not going to pretend for one split second that the anti-family courts give a rat's ass about children and their well-being. I'm not saying there may not be some judges out there who actually do. I have not encountered one. They don't give a damn. The child's best interest is just a vacuous buzz phrase that they use to make children typically fatherless, sometimes motherless, for profits, for the Title 4D money, to line up the pockets of themselves, their cronies, what my friend Marianne Petrie rightly calls the third-party parasites, since most of these guardian ad litems and so forth, again, there may be exceptions, are nothing but parasites lining up their pockets off of destroying families. So these people don't care. It's somebody else's children. It's somebody, yours or Roman's or mine, parental rights. They don't care. And of course, the problem is accountability or total lack thereof. And the second problem is family courts, from my experience, are literally a cesspool of egomaniacs, sociopaths, and child abusers. Literally, these are not hyperbole. These are literally my experience when it comes to judges, many of the lawyers, and the third-party parasites such as DV evaluators, parental evaluators, and all that. I'm not saying there aren't good players in any of those categories out there. I'm saying I'm yet to encounter them. And then my question for you is, what do you think would be an appropriate age to start having children involved? And again, we are in a society, and I'm talking nationwide now. Later, I'll focus on Washington State. You need to be a certain age to be able to buy cigarettes, to buy alcohol, to enlist and go to war. Yet, you can, if you decide, quote unquote, at the age of 4 or 5 that you want to transition, then in most states, including insane California and such places, it's a gender-affirming care, whatever Orwellian BS language they use for basically mutilating boys. They're not making them into girls; they're mutilating them, and likewise with girls who presumably are transitioning into boys. So this outright child abuse, there doesn't seem to be a almost a lower limit. Which 5-year-old knows anything about the world or about their own identity, for that matter? So that's pure insanity, and it's child abuse. It needs to be called that. But back to your point, the child being kept in the loop by the court as opposed to parents, or especially one parent, per what you brought up in your remarks. What is your take, Matthew? A 7-year-old? My daughter is 7 now, by the way. And of course, the legal battle's been going on basically since she was a baby. 10, 14, what is your take on that?
I got to say, that is a really good question. And I'm kind of, thinking about it for the first time. But, I know there are things in court like teenage discretion, and, children can decide with whom they want to live if they reach a requisite age level. And we see that a lot. But with something like this, I think that any time there's one parent has a no contact order, or one parent is on supervised visitation, which is synonymous with termination. But when there's one
I
parent
agree.
that goes a long time, or projected to go a long time on a temporary order, the children should be told, and I think that should be as soon as they're in school. I would say at school age, if a children is 5 or 6, there's got to be some kind of educated child psychologist who can sit down with I don't know, the 8-year-old or the 10-year-old, what have you, and say, listen, we have a temporary order here that says there's no contact between you and the other parent, and we don't know how long it's going to last, but this is what's happening. Nobody's in trouble. Nobody's going to go to jail. Try to reassure the minor children what's happening. But now that I think about this, I just think that family courts are so overloaded and so over docketed, if you will, that I just think that with overpopulation being what it is, the powers that be just don't have the time or the money or the inclination to want to actually dispense these kind of individual human type of rights. And it's kind of a lamentable situation, but it's something I think that needs to be worked on. And I think that there needs to be some kind of, and even if it's not talking to the children, maybe they could issue a prepared statement and they could order the custodial parent to read it aloud to the minor child. Now, whether the custodial parent would do that, I don't know. It's hard to make things on the honor system and expect people to follow through in family court, especially a custodial parent who thinks, I've won, I don't have to do anything,
Matthew, excuse me, any so-called custodial parent who has won through lying and through pushing the other parent out of child's life, one, shouldn't have custody to begin with, and two, expecting honor system for such individuals. And again, I'm just going to be blunt. My ex-wife, she lies the moment she opens her mouth. She and her attorney are more than attorneys. She has multiple. She has a wealthy family, and I've been, as Roman knows, pro se for the past 3 years or so, 4 years. So they're welcome to sue me because I can prove everything I said. She has repeatedly lied on the road, zero consequences. She's of the right gender, of the right national origin, and of the right family and legal and lawyer ties to the corrupt judges in Seattle, King County. My case should have never been in Seattle. My minor daughter was born across the state. The mother abducted her. So she should land in jail for parental abduction, pre-planned kidnapping of a child. But the state is engaging, as Roman knows better than any of us, in child trafficking under the color of state law. And so me raising these issues, documenting, providing evidence, these are the matters of record, not of my opinion, didn't matter any. But my point is this. Without commenting on anybody else's wife or ex-husband or ex-partner or whatever, just focusing on my own example, if somebody lies the moment she opens her mouth, repeatedly commits perjury, and the kangaroo anti-family courts look the other way, while I do not have that kind of restraining order, I do have restrictions on me. We maybe get to touch that later. But thankfully, I do get to see my daughter without so-called supervision. Again, I hate the word victim. I'm the survivor of years of documented domestic violence, coercive control, and other abuse, not the other way around. But nobody cares because this is woke Marxist feminist Republic of Washington. And because one side has all kinds of resources, financial and other, ties to the courts and judges and so forth, and the other side has nothing. He's a foreign-born, limited financial means, no political clout, lawful immigrant, similar to Roman. I've been in the United States for over 30 years, but legally, lawfully. But I'm not Arnold Schwarzenegger or some such. But going back to your point, Matthew, if somebody who lied blatantly, engaging in domestic violence on one hand, false accusations on the other, engaging in fraud with respect to so-called child support, child care while the child was of that age, and so forth, with her best friend who is a junkie, as opposed to being a licensed, or at least a former junkie, as opposed to being a licensed child care provider. And all this is documented. And nobody cares. So expecting honor from an individual like that, who is a pathological liar, that's not going to fly.
Okay, we got Timothy Phillips dropping out. I think he had actually some sort of delivery to his house, so I'm sure he will reconnect. But we can continue. So, Predrag, thank you for sharing your some details of the case you started last week, so I appreciate it. Now, just to make sure for the viewers, you said you are a PhD, right? You have with an advanced degree. I'm just connecting the team.
I have multiple advanced degrees. Didn't help me much in life because of some bad decisions, I guess. Primarily with whom I married and procreated a child with, and in which state. Because while most states are bad unless they have equal shared parenting, some are worse, and Washington is probably Washington State, the woke Soviet Republic, what I call. English-speaking Soviet Republic of Washington State is the worst of the worst insofar as gender-based discrimination. The so-called family courts are literally kangaroo courts per Black Law's dictionary definition. And this is actually my first topic, which I'm sure you've covered in podcasts before and from your own experience, Roman. But those are some things that I want to comment on.
Yeah, makes sense.
I mean, I'm an ABD, as they call it in mathematics, and PhD in computer science. From University of Illinois many years ago, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I haven't spent a day in law school. I've been pro se for the past 3 years. I've communicated with you and separately with Matthew Phillips insofar as some ideas, which are the third topic in my list, by the way, insofar as going after the corrupt states and state and court actors for these blatant violations of constitutionally and otherwise federally protected rights, civil rights, really basic human rights.
Yeah, but there isn't. Yeah, the reason I'm asking is just, for the people to know that T. Matthew Phillips is obviously an attorney, right? I have a legal background. I have a law degree from Israel, and I also have an advanced degree here from the United States. I have an MBA from a prestigious university, and I worked in world's largest corporation. So you see this panel, for example, 3 people, right? Educated, intelligent, you are very organized, eloquent. We understand what's going on, and yet once you set foot in family court, right, they turn into some sort of civil criminal. So people need to understand that, because the image of fathers, particularly, right, and of course we know that mothers are increasingly becoming victims of family court for balance, right, with plausible deniability. But that's the image that's presented. Now, Matthew, if I may,
I've been treated like a criminal by the state of Washington, which is why I intend to sue the state. In particular, and I know Matthew Phillips cannot give a legal advice, so I wouldn't interpret it that way. But both of you, really, both Matthew and yourself, Roman, may want to chip in for the purposes of harassment, intimidation, and just being terrorized by the state. I was repeatedly threatened with arrest, no indictment, no crime committed, over fraudulent, as they were, so-called, arrears on the so-called child support. I call it so-called because it has nothing to do with supporting my daughter. It has to do with financing my abuser of X years and her manicures and pedicures and spas, literally. My daughter is old enough to share this. So, that's how the so-called child support money is being spent. While I've been indigent, my health has been severely damaged. And, I'll talk maybe about that some other time. I'm a former chess player. I used to have practically photographic memory, and my long-term memory is excellent. If you ask me what I had for breakfast this morning or yesterday, I probably won't remember anymore. And again, I've been diagnosed with PTSD and so forth because of the years of abuse, first by ex-wife and then by both ex-wife and the anti-family courts. But back to what you said about criminalizing fathers, criminalizing so-called non-custodial parents, totally unlawful and unconstitutional. That category is because, as another my fellow Washingtonian, Tanawa Downing, kept saying, and some other people kept arguing, there is no first and second class parent. There is no first and second class citizen in the United States. Slavery was abolished in 1865. What does this mean, the first class and the second class parent? Unless restrictions need to be imposed on a parent because of being unfit, abusive, and so forth, and there's abundant Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court case law, which the kangaroo courts in Washington State ignore. They ignore the Constitution. They ignore the case law from the U.S. Supreme Court. There should be no grounds. These judges should not be given this infinite discretion to do whatever the hell they want. So in Washington State, as a very gender discriminating Marxist feminist hellhole that it is, criminalization of fathers is in full swing. I've been repeatedly threatened with arrest, even though thugs, and I'm calling them thugs, from the so-called Division of Child Support, Orwellian misnomer as it is, Seattle office, knew of my indigency, knew that I was approved for public need-based assistance, and I was reviewed whether I qualify or not. They didn't care. They kept extorting whether I had unemployment insurance or other at ridiculous amounts, based on a court order for 2018. They wouldn't even provide information. I thought I could change that through the administrative process. I subsequently learned I could not. Then they escalated with the county prosecutor, and a very smart former student of mine in Eastern Washington University, a Spokane native, said, look, something is wrong. Spokane is becoming increasingly like Seattle. It is, and not in good ways. Not in terms of good coffee. It's getting increasingly woke, increasingly corrupt, increased crime. The county prosecutor's office doesn't do anything to curb the crime. I filed multiple crime reports on white-collar crime insofar as fraud, including in Spokane County, in that courthouse, by, of course, state or quasi-state actors. That was ignored. The prosecutor's office wouldn't return my phone calls or emails. But when the Division of Child Support Mafia, and they are a racketeering mafia, with an apology to traditional mafia, because the traditional mafia leaves children alone. The DCS mafia does not, so they're more morally depraved than your Russian, my Serbian, Montenegrin, or Italian, or any traditional mafia. They literally are more morally depraved. They are worse. They engage the county prosecutor. I was threatened with arrest. The county prosecutor knew that I was indigent for many months at that time, actually over a year. The court knew, of course, her wife knows, but she's a sociopath. She doesn't care. But she's not the main problem. Sociopaths being given, and narcissists and abusers being given a primary, of course, it is a big problem, so-called primary custody. But then the state enforcing these things, I was repeatedly threatened with arrest. Because I was found indigent, do you think that they modified the court? I mean, eventually they did on the so-called child support. No, but they said, look, since you may go to jail, we're going to assign what I call a public offender, a completely useless, as it turned out, public defender from the Spokane County's office. And I don't blame this young, recent out of law school lawyer. The whole thing was a charade with the purpose of giving an illusion that I'm given a due process, and that the whole thing isn't a complete travesty, the charade. And I kept raising the court's jurisdiction. That was not really properly addressed. They said, we have the jurisdiction because we say so. I challenged both the personal and subject matter jurisdictions. I cited the United States Constitution, Article 3, Section 2. When state is a player is a litigant, the original jurisdiction goes to the US Supreme Court. That's in the United States Constitution. Now, you could say, hey, it's fine to be heard in the state court because the judiciary and the executive branches, and the county prosecutor, the racketeering mafia that is the so-called Division of Child Support, these are the state and quasi-state actors on the executive as opposed to judicial or judiciary side. But what's the problem? The problem is that the two are embedded. There is no proper separation. As a matter of fact, Matthew may be familiar with this. Minnesota Supreme Court literally ruled in so-called child support context in the state of Minnesota. I don't have the case law in front of me. But when you fail to have this separation, when these agencies can interpret and make up laws and all that, then it results in tyranny. And Washington State is a perfect living example of a neo-Marxist tyranny with no separation of powers, with an embeddedness between the executive and the judiciary branches, that the Minnesota Supreme Court, again, it's a different state, but the U.S. Constitution, you would think, applies everywhere. In Washington State, it doesn't. That the Minnesota Supreme Court ruled a few years ago. I'll find the case law and I'll send you gentlemen later. I'm not very good at multitasking anymore. And as further evidence of this lack of separation, talking to my friend, a fellow Washingtonian, Ken Villanova, and others, and communicating with Tanawa Downing, for whom I hope and pray he's doing well. He has had some incidents recently. He's in Washington, D.C., going to the Supreme Court again. And others, I raised the question. First off, I asked for a jury trial. I was denied that. Washington State doesn't stipulate one way or another. But again, you would think that the 7th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution applies. It doesn't. Neither do the 1st or the 14th or the 5th or the 6th or the rest. Second, I do ask, is any commissioner or judge under a cooperative arrangement? Is any of them getting paid out of the federal Title 4D money? They refuse to answer. The most recent judge here in Spokane County, State versus Predrag Tosic, a living man. I asked the judge outright, asked the commissioner first, he didn't answer. And judge's response was, Mr. Tosic, I'm the one asking questions, not answering them. Your Honor, I'm trying to establish whether you have a conflict of interest. I've already raised the issue of court's lack of jurisdiction, in my opinion, and here is why the court lacks personal jurisdiction over me. Here's why the court lacks subject matter jurisdiction, and here's why the original jurisdiction belongs to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court is not going to hear every case like that. They can delegate it to lower courts. However, lower federal courts, where the due process exists, the Seventh Amendment exists, and I can insist and actually be granted, because it's a constitutional right, a trial by a jury. No, Mr. Tosic, you're not going to get a jury trial. You're going to get the bench trial. For those who are not versed in the legal vernacular, it just means a judge. The same judge who is to determine what's right and what's wrong, and whether I was in contempt, on a matter of so-called this racket masquerading as so-called child support, and that judge would not answer a very basic question whether she has a conflict of interest or not, through what's in Washington state called Public Records Act, which, if you can think of it as a state version of the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act at the federal level. I did obtain information. I know that in King County, where you, Roman, had your case some number of years ago, certain commissioners are directly paid out of Title 40, including the one I dealt with in my own case several years back.
It's a clever system of oppression.
Spokane County gets federal money, and this information must be disclosed. And then some judges and commissioners are paid out of federal money. The Spokane County Superior Court specifically got federal money for child support enforcement. And then you have a judge or a commissioner paid out of that who is going to be fair and impartial in a matter of state. Presumably it's not ex-wife anymore, it's the state, because she has state on her side, against the man who's been found indigent repeatedly since 2022, disabled since 2023. They don't care. They just don't care. And judges who lack jurisdiction and who have blatant conflict of interest, or may have because they're refusing to answer these questions, are the ones who are going to adjudicate and make fair and impartial determination. It's a joke. Roman, you grew up, I don't know how old you were when you went to Israel and into the U.S. from the USSR. I grew up in a softer, version of a Marxist dictatorship, the former Yugoslavia.
Yeah, you're a full circle back, and it's new for Americans like T. Matthew.
Yeah, so
welcome,
even
welcome
the communists in the old
welcome
country would
prevent.
Would rather, would try to cover it up a little better and would give a more of an appearance of a fair trial while it's still a kangaroo court and not a fair trial. These guys are in Washington state, they're not even pretending. And I could say a lot about appellate courts and what kind of joke they are, but let's maybe leave that for another day. But my point I want to get across here, you have a lack of separation between the judiciary and the executive branches. You have the DCS, it's called Division of Child Support, or Orwellian misnomer as it is, acting on their whims. I've reminded them that the recent overturn of the so-called Chevron doctrine by the U.S. Supreme Court implies agencies cannot make law or even interpret law, so that they line up their pockets or the state's pockets. They're ignoring all that, just like other case law is being ignored, whether it's parental rights, whether it's this racket, the so-called child support, or anything else. So other than federal lawsuits and things that I brought up, kind of as a, not segue, but a follow-up to what Matthew Phillips is doing with a group of our friends in California, Rob Emmert, Mark Fidelman, and others who are dear friends. And I hope that lawsuit is, I don't know everybody there, but I know several of those people. And I hope that that's going to succeed. We do need states and counties and judges and the DCS mafia and CPS mafia to start being held accountable. In Washington state, insofar as state courts, all the way up to the state Supreme Court, it's a joke. It's a communist-like travesty and a total joke.
Predrag, listen, we're trying to keep the live streams to some sort of manageable length. What you are saying is very important, but it echoes, the sentiment of so many parents, right? Fathers, mothers, we have to add the qualifier, that come on the show, and you can see all over the web, all over Facebook. So I think, we as brainstorming, program, right, need to move forward from rattling out, the injustices that we've been experiencing, all of us, right, towards solutions. Especially we have hopefully smart people, right, with advanced degrees. I think we need to move toward, pointing the way forward. I have not opined, Matthew, on your opinion rant, so please allow me to do that.
Yes.
Even though it's a show that we do together, right? We don't have to agree on everything, and I do disagree with you on this topic, right? So we make it more interesting. I
not the first time.
Yeah, that's what makes it interesting, right? I think children are not supposed to be involved in the legal process, basically in any capacity, because they're children. It traumatizes them. They're not mature enough to make any conclusions. There are certain areas in the brain, to the extent you can trust research today, right, that don't develop until the age of 25. That's why you see government brainwashing children when they're students. They're college students, or maybe a master's degree, right? But they, they're not mature enough, and that's why they're so susceptible to indoctrination or propaganda or whatever, brainwashing, however you call it. And
as somebody who has taught in colleges much of my post-PhD adult life, I couldn't agree more with you, Roman, on this last part, including the indoctrination on college campuses.
If the indoctrination is so powerful for adults or semi-adults or
young adults,
young adults who are above the legal cutoff age, which is 18, right, at least, or 21 for certain purposes, right? What exact information can you extract, quote from a young child? And maybe that's the experience in Nevada, right, or in California. I'm not familiar with that particular jurisdiction on that particular topic, but I'll tell you that in the state of New York, what they do, they call it in camera. In camera, essentially, I call it interrogation, because what happened, in my case, for example, Janet McFarland, who has no children of her own, right? She invited my children to some sort of in camera, right? Which the camera is almost, it sounds like a cell in many languages, right? Some sort of, depth in the bowels of some governmental building. You have a government official, frightening, black-dressed, enrobed tyrant, right? The parents are not present. There's an attorney for the children who is supposedly present, right? Who is also another state actor, right? Maybe there's an interpreter. Maybe there's a court recorder. Maybe there's an armed, intimidating guard with a gun, right? And protective vest, right? Standing there. So it's a completely overwhelming for a young child, environment, right? And you're supposed to extract some sort of information, let alone that, who knows what actually happens there. I spoke to an attorney who is a practicing attorney in New York, and he told me there was a scandal a couple of years ago. That's a scandal that was actually exposed. That I think it was a male judge who was taking the children and making them sit on his lap, during the in-camera interrogation. Right now, what happens is completely. Sorry, that's New York for you. Yeah. So, but it makes it more vibrant, I guess, for a live show. So.
Yes.
The recordings of that in-camera interrogation are not available to the parents, right? And in order to make it, the situation even more not comical but tragic, right, and insidious for the parent, right? If you appeal the decision, right, and the Court of Appeals wants to see what has been said. Ostensibly during that in-camera interrogation, right? You need to pay for the transcripts that you will never see, right? So, I think it's absolutely traumatizing for a child. For the longest time in legal history and jurisprudence in many countries, children were not allowed to testify, precisely for these reasons, right? And Predrag, as you mentioned, there are multiple legal actions or legal, thresholds, right? That don't apply to children, right? And this is the insidious nature of what we are seeing here, the experience the government built for us, right? Because, as you said, there are multiple things that you are not allowed to have a tattoo, right? Tattoo till a certain age, buy a beer, buy a cigarette, drive a car, vote, right? Go to war, right? But yet you are allowed, to cut your vital organs,
transition,
right?
yes.
And to until you eliminate your father, right? So that's what you're allowed. So of course it's preposterous. Of course it's ridiculous what they're doing, right? It's very Orwellian what we're going through, right? Because what the government wants, it wants people to obey whatever ridiculous orders or ridiculous reality that the government builds for the people, right? Because if you start believing I'm paraphrasing, right? Ridiculously, right? You will accept any injustice, and that's what they are wanting. That's what the program has been all along. So, I think children, especially children who are brainwashed, children who are left, which what the court does, right? Left in the complete possession as hostages of the alienator or alienated parent, right? Their evidence, their testimony, whatever they offer, is useless, absolutely, because it's the alienator actually speaking through their mouths. So, and that's what the court does. By the way, their system is very, very simple. They manufacture an excuse, they separate the targeted parent, majority cases again the father, right? They leave the child with the alienator, right? They do it forcefully, they put you on supervised, or they just cut the contact completely, right? And once the child is completely brainwashed, they start the government starts hiding behind the children's small back. That's what they do, right? So they pull back the weight on the children's shoulders, and whatever testimony they offer is completely useless. I do agree with you that they need to be some sort of psychological background for the judge at least. But of course, they don't go through any courses, right? They don't get any education in child psychology. That's a point that I will continue harping on. They have no children. They don't have any experience with children, right? Not that education can replace being a parent, right? No education can replace it. So, and if you have a judge who is agenda-driven, right, has no experience, not even formal, what's called, post-degree education as an attorney or as a judge, right? What value does it bring? It's no value. They only use the children, as leverage, right? And children and actually the parents, right, are manipulated by the government to produce the outcomes that the government wants. So that's my take on that. It's an important topic. I agree with you. I do cite there's a famous case that came out of actually Illinois, Chicago. I don't remember now the exact, but it's on my Facebook. I will repost it. That there was a brave judge, I think a decade ago, who said that these in-camera investigations or question of a child, there's nothing less than child abuse, judicial child abuse. That's a judge who said that. So that's a quotation that I use. Yes.
Well, I would qualify that the child's age matters. That being said, you're absolutely right. Especially male brain keeps developing till the age of 25. Girls/young women, generally speaking, mature sooner than men. But the point is, when we are talking of children that are in elementary school or kindergarten or younger, clearly they cannot make their own calls on any important matters, whether which gender they're supposed to be or being brainwashed that they should become or what have you, or any of these other fundamental things, because they're just too young and they don't have the maturity. And as Roman said, it's very easy to manipulate. That being said, I don't know what the answer is, because the idea of these child advocates, so-called guardian ad litems, and similar, my experience, of course, is completely horrible. But the point is, hardly anybody has a good experience. Most people's experience with so-called child advocates, so-called courts-appointed so-called child advocate, is that basically it was just another pit for money with no value provided. In my case, it's worse than no value provided. That lying son of a bitch has caused so much harm and is on the top of the list of my upcoming federal lawsuit. Again, he can sue me. This guy falsified witness statements, coach texts, that because X did admit in different places that she was repeatedly violent against me. And this guy was a PhD in psychology. Just so that it doesn't sound it's only lawyers who are scum when it comes to guardian ad litems and such. Sometimes there are guardian ad litems from other professions who are equally morally depraved crooks and fraudsters. My guardian ad litem coached ex-wife that she was, kicking me, hitting me repeatedly, throwing hard objects at me, threatening to come to workplace back in the day and scream. I have emails. I provided all of this to the court. It was all ignored. That she did all of that and more out of fear. Now, a pathological liar that my ex-spouse is, she would never think of her own. And obviously, you don't need PhD in psychology to realize this is not, whatever the reasons may be, that certainly fear is not among, if you're fearful of somebody, you're going to hide from them. You're not going to threaten to go to their workplace and scream and repeatedly physically engage them and so forth. So he asked her, okay, so you admitted this, I'm paraphrasing. It was out of fear, no? It was fear-based. Oh, yeah, I was fearful. So he literally coaches the preferred parent so that they can all line up their pockets at my expense and my daughter's. And I pointed this out. Guess what the Kangaroo Court in Seattle, King County Anti-Family Court did? It prevented my cross-examination of guardian ad litem. Whatever the pretext or excuse was, I started, the judge stopped it. Then later on, the judge said that he was going to allow written interrogatories because the trial needed to be wrapped up. I mean, the rush justice is no justice at all to begin with. I mean, I'm sure Matthew can, and I even agreed to that. Okay, Your Honor, like the next morning or maybe the last morning of the trial, when can I do these written interrogatories? Sorry, Dr. Tosic, that train has, that ship has sailed. My cross-examination of the DV evaluator, who is another object crook fraudster and who should be in jail, was repeatedly disrupted by the judge. And once I exposed her lies, The DVL validator was a she. The guardian ad litem was a he. The judge interrupted and said, okay, this is no longer beneficial. We're going to stop here. No more questions to the DVL validator. And then the cross-examination of guardian ad litem was practically completely prevented, which is, again, a good segue to my first topic. We'll probably only have the time for one, but there is no due process in these courts. That's, my personal belief, and I agree with Marianne Patry on whose podcast I was a couple of months ago, is that the anti-family courts are beyond redemption. They should be abolished, and regular civil procedure, including the Seventh Amendment and all the rest, should be reinstated when the two parents cannot agree and have to go to a court. But in Washington State, these are literally kangaroo court. Those who think that this is just a phrase that I'm making up, you can look up Black's Law Dictionary or a similar dictionary. It's a term used in the Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence for over 100 years now, not just in the United States. And the anti-family courts in King County and really across the state of Washington perfectly match a definition of a kangaroo court, starting but not limited to no due process.
Yeah, we lost you, Matthew, for a second, and now you are back. So, Predrag, these are all good topics and good subjects for discussion. What I'm trying to say is that we need to move past that, and what obviously what the court is doing, right? This is I'm not alone here, so I don't know if you are getting the noise, but let me actually move. Since I have
beautiful background, I love it. Beautiful scenery.
I have a different setup here, and I have a fancy new mic, so I want to send the thank you for people who support us, right? Support me, support other fighters. So it's very, very important because this thing takes time and energy. I'm a bit disheveled here, but I rode my bike. That's another topic that I wanted to cover. My e-bike. I attended town hall by Senator Hoylman, who actually the key topic there was I kind of forced discussion on family court, but the key topic there was e-bikes. Safety, they want to regulate them. They don't like people's mobility. I need to dedicate, a whole topic to that. But anyway, to what you are saying, and that's to keep it on our conversation. Listen, it is very clear that the courts don't operate under law. At least, it should be clear by now to anyone. They are forcing an ideological transition. Again, speaking about
and money
for America. That's what they're doing, and that's I know that you are focusing on Washington State. Which is because you're an intelligent man, Dr. Tosic, right? And you are trying to keep it limited. But we need to
Matthew, can you hear Roman still? Or is it on my end or on his end?
Yes, I think he's he's frozen now. It appears. I think we're still live. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I had a quality rant. So if you missed that, that's okay. So what I'm saying is that it's very clear that's a common thing. Go. Mm-hmm.
No, I was going to say I didn't mean to interrupt, but I did get the quote for you about when the government wants to sell us their reality, however crazy it is. And I think the quote comes from a 1998 movie starring Jim Carrey. And the quote goes something like this: "We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented." That's from the TRoman Show.
The TRoman Show. It's a superb movie. Yes, it's an excellent movie.
Yeah, that's our favorite movie, right? It brought the topic. So I probably a good point to jump off. I want to acknowledge the audience. So Jacob is joining from Colorado. Jacob, thanks for everything that you are doing. Now, I think I posted it as well, but there was actually great news coming from Colorado because the child attorney, GAL, whatever they're called, it's just a communist change of names, right? In every they called AFC in New York, was held accountable, was indicted. A female AFC, GL, was indicted in Colorado. So that's an important development. And we see accountability if we force the accountability. Anthony Cancel is saying personal hello to you, Predrag. He's saying, brother. Yeah, so that's good. We have Tony joining. So we We have people actually joining, and probably afterward it will climb to much larger audience. So, gentlemen, I think it's a good point for us to jump off. Good topics. I think it's we can continue the conversation. I would like to take it to more, I would say, solution-based live stream, right? Because the stories, however they're painful to us, the stories are very similar. Right? The court experience is very, very similar. The oppression in court is very, very similar. And the question is what the solutions are. So I'm not claiming to know all the solutions, but I had two examples just this last week, right? I confronted the state senator, a very important senator, who is the head of the Judiciary Committee of the New York State Senate. No law can pass without his approval, right? And I am a citizen journalist, so I caught him in quote unquote, right? I was very respectful. You can see the recording. To his credit, I have to say that he allowed the recording. He did answer questions, begrudgingly, I would say so, but he still answered them, and that's what we should be doing, right? So I asked him about his opinion about what he thinks about childless judges, right? Or LGBTQ judges, right, in family court, and he conveyed his opinion that there's no, he's for judicial diversity. Now the public might disagree, but you have to have them on record in order to have the discussion, right? So that's one way to impose accountability. Now, a second development that I mentioned at the beginning of the show is that Janet McFarland and myself and other victims, we established the Facebook group Fire Janet McFarland about 2 years ago, right? He's actually being fired. That's what it sounds like. Maybe not fired, maybe transferred. There's some rumors about that. I'll dedicate a separate show to this topic. But it sounds that was the way to impose public accountability, right? So instead of just complaining, we need to do completely peacefully, but relentlessly, exercise our First Amendment. So I think the next show, maybe with you, Predrag, and of course with you, Matthew, maybe we should dedicate more towards solutions rather than describing, unfortunately.
No, I agree with that. And just to point one, when I say I'm focusing on Washington State, I'm well aware there are stories from other states that are fundamentally very similar. But, I'm kind of trying to let other people speak from their direct experience, and I'm focusing on my own. And then insofar as my statements that Washington is one of the worst, I have statistics to support that, right? Nationwide, the primary custodial parent is the woman / mother 82% of the time, father 17.5% of the time. So roughly the ratio is 9-2. When you don't have equal shared parenting, for every 9 women who get the primary custody of child or children, there are 2 men. In Washington State, it's something like 93 point whatever percent versus less than 7%. So I like talking ratios, right? As a mathematician, basically, for every father who gets primary custody, there is 13 or 14 mothers. Now you show me one piece of legitimate social science research saying that women are 14 times as likely to be a good parent or a better parent.
They're afraid to touch the topic. They will lose their career. Nobody touches the topic of the disparity between sexes. Nobody can even dare to say that the majority of alienators are women, which is
you may be surprised, but there are people who are saying that it's all endemic patriarchy or some other Marxist feminist bullshit slogan, because that's what it is. It's bullshit slogans with no meaning. So they're saying that it's misogyny and patriarchy that are driving family courts. Do not get me wrong. There are good mothers who've been victimized by these courts as well. I don't know of any case in Washington State, but I certainly know of cases in other states. But who is removed from their children 9 out of 10 times? Who is a victim of false allegations of domestic and or sexual violence and or child abuse 9 out of 10 times? To paraphrase another recent friend of mine and fighter, Bill Corbett, who's down in Atlanta, Georgia, these are gendered issues. If it's 10-1 ratio or more, then at least there is a strong correlation with gender. You can't talk about it because, patriarchy. I mean, it's again, if you go back to what you were saying earlier, Roman, to the Frankfurt School, they wanted to subvert the Western civilization, not just the United States, through destruction of families and taking over academic institutions and other cultural institutions. And as somebody who's been doing college teaching most of my life, even though I'm in different circumstances right now, and again, somebody who's been unfortunate enough to blunder into having a child with a narcissistic sociopath and then be dragged through these various courts, the Marxists from the Frankfurt School, Marcuse and others who came to the US and got positions at universities to brainwash children and all that, have succeeded, frankly, beyond their wildest expectations. 1 of 3 children in this country is being raised without a biological father at least 50% of the time.
How else?
I was watching the Libertarian Party convention or an event on YouTube that a friend of mine shared, another friend shared, not recent, but either 2016 or 2020, where the guy said once Title 4D was signed into law by Bill Clinton, another great, very respectful man of women and all that, excuse my sarcasm, but of course both parties in both houses of Congress voted for that travesty. Fatherless households have increased tenfold. This is not somebody knocking up his girlfriend and not taking responsibility for that. This is fathers being systemically removed by these abusers in black robes and the rest of the crime cartel, the DCS, the CPS, and all these child abusing agencies and life destroying agencies. This is systemic, and you're correct, Roman. It needs to be exposed. It's not a coincidence. It's both ideology and profits through Title 4D primarily, getting federal money. And yes, a part of the action is what I'm proposing in my third item, and we're probably running out of time for today. RICO. RICO against the states, against judges, against the DCS racketeering mafia, lawyers, guardian ad litems, and so forth.
Yeah, the issue is
that they're committing treason against the United States government. They're defrauding the federal taxpayers. And another thing that I discussed with some of fellow abused fathers in Washington state is a qui tam action. Acting on our own behalf, but also saying that we act on the behalf of the United States government. Because states such as Washington and its corrupt courts and its corrupt state agencies, this nexus between judiciary and the executive branches of the state government, are defrauding the American taxpayers, and they're committing acts of treason against the United States government. And qui tam, in my opinion, I'll let Matthew as a lawyer chime in, sounds like a perfectly legitimate vehicle that I think has been underutilized. So RICO on our own behalf, individually, and class action. And then qui tam, literally trying to get the United States government against the corrupt states such as Washington and New York and others.
Predrag, that's a big topic. We did discuss that multiple times. So, federal courts, unfortunately, I'm not saying that your view is naive, but many people who have no experience in federal court, they seem to think that the federal court is a panacea. They're as corrupt as state courts. They're slightly more respectful. They write longer decisions, but fundamentally, you're asking the government to hold government accountable, which is very, very rare. There are some good judges. I would say that the slight, very, very tiny percentage of good judges, is higher in federal court, of course, in comparison to family court, right? But if you think that by filing a RICO action, which has been tried and tested, you will solve the state problem, that view unfortunately has been disproved time and time again. There was a RICO action filed here in one of the better courts, the Northern District of New York State, which was denied. T. Matthew Phillips leads a very interesting class action that was denied in the district level, and now it's under appeal, right? We can talk about that. So federal court will not solve the issue. We are dealing, again, this is not a legal problem. It's an ideological problem. The government is turning America communist. It's very, very clear. How can you take down a successful nation, rich nation, through manufactured fatherlessness, right? That's what they're doing.
It is manufactured fatherlessness. Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you, Roman, but I was kind of revisiting Noam Chomsky and late Edward Herman's Manufacturing Consent, a classic book in my opinion. And I'm on the political right, but I very much am respectful and read intelligent leftist narratives and books such as Professors Chomsky and Herman in this case. And Manufacturing Consent, how the media and military-industrial nexus operate. You're exactly right, Roman.
Yeah.
It is manufactured fatherlessness. I'm not saying there aren't fathers out there who abolish their children or, leave their kids. People like you and I and Matthew and thousands of others, my health, my career have been destroyed just to stay in my daughter's life. And the biggest enemy isn't a narcissistic sociopath ex-wife. I'm calling her that publicly. She's more than welcome to take me to the court because I have tons of evidence of behavior that is only consistent with a serious cluster B mental disorder. Okay? But she's not the biggest problem. The state of Washington, its corrupt kangaroo courts, the racketeering mafia that is the so-called division of child support. It's perfectly appropriate to call them racketeering mafia. That's exactly what they do. They're the problem. And so, in other words, to use your brief for describing this whole nexus, the government, the state government. You may or may not be right about federal. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Matthew, I'll give the last word to you, and we'll finish the show.
Well, I have to say the highlight of the show for me, we need like a Jerry Springer final thought, maybe, you know. But the phrase that the children's best interest, this purportedly venerable slogan, best interest of the children, is nothing more than a vacuous bus slogan. So I love that expression, vacuous bus slogan. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see everybody next week. Thanks everybody for joining and watching.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.